I never expected my peaceful Tuesday morning to turn into the beginning of a domestic nightmare. But there I was, standing in my kitchen doorway, staring at my mother-in-law Gloria, who had somehow materialized at my breakfast table like an unwanted apparition. My name is Sawyer, and until that moment, I'd been living what I considered a pretty well-balanced life. Working from home as an accountant, raising 2 great kids, and maintaining a happy marriage, all without the constant physical presence of my mother-in-law. Sure, she lived a comfortable 3-hour drive away, which meant manageable weekend visits every couple of months. Perfect distance, if you ask me. I sold my house, Gloria announced, stirring sugar into her self-served coffee. She'd clearly helped herself to my kitchen before I'd even come downstairs. The market was too good to pass up. I gripped my empty coffee mug tighter, trying to process her words. You sold your house. When did this happen? Oh, just finalized yesterday. She waved her hand dismissively, as if selling her home of 30 years was as casual as changing her nail polish. I thought, why not surprise everyone? The kids will be so excited to have their grandmother around more often. The word around made my stomach drop. Around? What exactly do you mean by that, Gloria? Well, I'll be staying here while I figure out my next move. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Ethan always said I was welcome anytime. Of course he did. My dear husband, always trying to please everyone, especially his mother. I made a mental note to have a serious conversation with him later. Does Ethan know about this? I managed to ask, keeping my voice steady. Not yet. He's already left for work, hasn't he? I thought we could surprise him when he gets home. Gloria took another sip of her coffee, grimacing slightly. You know, dear, you really should try that premium coffee brand I recommended. This tastes rather commercial. Before I could respond, thundering footsteps announced the arrival of my kids. Jack, my 10-year-old, skidded into the kitchen first, his superhero pajamas rumpled from sleep. 8-year-old Ella followed close behind, her eyes widening at the sight of her grandmother. Grandma! They shouted in unison, rushing to hug her. My darlings! Gloria cooed, embracing them. How would you like having Grandma around more often? I watched their excited faces and felt my chest tighten. This wasn't just about me anymore. Gloria had cleverly ensured her announcement would have an audience. My children's genuine joy would make it nearly impossible to object to her presence without looking like the villain. Mom, can Grandma stay in my room? Ella asked, bouncing on her toes. Oh, sweetie, I brought my own things. They're in my car, Gloria interjected before I could answer. I thought the guest room would be perfect. It gets such lovely morning light. I stood there, coffee mug still empty, watching as Gloria masterfully took control of my household in less than 15 minutes. The guest room, my home office where I worked full-time, was apparently now her new bedroom. Kids, you need to get ready for school, I said, finally finding my voice. Go on up and get dressed. Don't forget to brush your teeth. As they rushed upstairs, Gloria began rummaging through my cabinets, pulling out pans. I thought I'd make the children a proper breakfast. Pop-Tarts aren't really suitable nutrition for growing minds, are they? I felt my jaw clench. The kids like their routine, Gloria. And I need to talk to you about. Oh, would you be a dear and help me bring in my luggage? She cut me off, already cracking eggs into a bowl. I packed light, just 14 boxes and 3 suitcases. For now. For now. Those 2 words echoed in my head like a death knell. As I watched her move around my kitchen like she owned it, I realized this wasn't just a visit. This was an invasion, and Gloria had just appointed herself supreme commander of my household. My phone buzzed, a text from Ethan. Running late tonight. Budget meeting. Love you. I stared at the message, then at Gloria humming as she scrambled eggs in my favorite pan. Something had to be done, and clearly, I would have to be the one to do it. Ethan didn't come home until after 9 that night. I'd spent the entire day watching Gloria systematically reorganize my kitchen, rearrange my living room furniture, and critique my parenting choices through carefully worded suggestions. By the time he walked through the door, I was ready to explode. Mom! Ethan stopped dead in his tracks, briefcase still in hand. What are you doing here? Gloria emerged from the kitchen, wearing the apron I'd received last Christmas. Surprise! I made your favorite pot roast. Though I must say, Sawyer's oven runs a bit hot. We should really have that checked. I watched my husband's face cycle through confusion, joy, and finally, concern as he glanced my way. This is unexpected. Why didn't you call first? Oh, you know me. I love surprises. Gloria bustled over to hug him. And wait until you hear my wonderful news. While Gloria launched into her practice speech about selling her house, I retreated to our bedroom. 10 minutes later, Ethan found me sitting on our bed, staring at my laptop screen where my work documents were still open. So, he started loosening his tie. This is something. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Your mother has commandeered my home office, criticized every parenting decision I've made in the last decade, and informed the kids they'll be starting music lessons next week. But sure, let's call it something. Ethan sat beside me, his shoulder touching mine. She means well. Does she? I turned to face him. Because earlier today, she told Jack that 10 is too old for superhero comics and that he should be reading classics instead. He was in tears. Mom can be traditional, Ethan hedged. Traditional? I stood up, pacing the room. She replaced all my cleaning supplies with vinegar solutions because apparently I've been poisoning our children with modern products. And don't even get me started on the lecture about screen time when she caught Ella playing her educational math game. A soft knock interrupted us. Ethan, the pot roast is getting cold, dear. I watched my husband's shoulders tense. We'll be right there, Mom. You know I can't work with her here, I said quietly. My clients expect privacy during video calls. I can't conduct business with your mother hovering around, commenting on everything. It's temporary, Ethan assured me, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. Just until she figures out her next move. The next morning, I woke to the sound of pots clanging in the kitchen. Gloria had apparently decided 6 a.m. was the perfect time to start making a proper breakfast. I found her whisking eggs while simultaneously lecturing Jack about his posture. Grandmother knows best, she was saying. When your father was your age, he sat up straight as a pin. Now look at you, hunched over like a little gargoyle. Jack caught my eye, silently pleading for rescue. Before I could intervene, Gloria spotted me. Sawyer, dear, I've been meaning to talk to you about the children's schedules. All these after-school activities, soccer, art class, it's too much stimulation. In my experience as a teacher, children need structure, not chaos. Their schedules are fine, Gloria, I said, pouring coffee into my travel mug. They're happy and doing well in school. Well, if you say so. Her tone suggested otherwise, though I noticed Ella's multiplication tables could use work. I've already ordered some workbooks. I nearly dropped my mug. You what? Just a few supplementary materials. Nothing excessive. She turned back to the stove. Oh, and I took the liberty of signing them both up for piano lessons. The teacher's an old colleague of mine. We start next Tuesday. I felt something snap inside me. No, you didn't. I'm sorry. You don't get to make these decisions, Gloria. This isn't your household. The kitchen fell silent. Jack slipped away, leaving his half-eaten breakfast behind. Gloria slowly placed the whisk down, her back still turned to me. I'm only trying to help, dear. Someone needs to think about the children's future. The implication hung in the air like poison gas. I grabbed my keys, my hands shaking. I'm taking the kids to school, I announced. When I get back, we need to talk about boundaries. Gloria's reply followed me down the hallway. Of course, dear. Though in my experience, boundaries often limit a child's potential. Just look at how Ethan turned out under my guidance. I closed my eyes, counted to 10, and called the kids. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. After dropping the kids at school, I decided to work from my favorite coffee shop rather than return home to another round of Gloria's helpful suggestions. As I settled in with my laptop, a notification popped up from my bank. My heart nearly stopped when I saw the transaction details. Gloria had used Ethan's old credit card, the joint one he'd forgotten to cancel after getting a new one, to make several large purchases. Piano lessons weren't the only thing she'd been arranging behind our backs. My hands shook as I scrolled through the charges. Private tutoring services, educational software subscriptions, and most alarming of all, a 5-figure deposit on a condo. In our neighborhood. My phone buzzed. Gloria's text read, Dear, I noticed you left without properly clearing the breakfast dishes. I've rearranged your kitchen cabinets to a more logical system. Also, the children's new tutor starts tomorrow. I called Ethan immediately. Your mother just spent $12,000 of our money. What? His voice cracked. That's impossible. She doesn't have access to our accounts. Remember your old Capital One card? The one you kept as a backup? She must have found it in your desk. The silence on his end spoke volumes. There's more, I continued. She put a deposit down on a condo, 3 blocks from our house. Maybe this is good news? Ethan's voice was hesitant. If she has her own place. The deposit was made with our money, Ethan. Our money? When I finally returned home that afternoon, I found Gloria in my home office, surrounded by boxes of my work files. She'd cleared my desk completely, replacing my dual monitors with framed photos of herself with the kids. "Oh, good, you're back," she said, not looking up from her organizing. "I hope you don't mind, but this room really wasn't being utilized properly. I've donated your old desk chair. Terrible for posture. The new one I ordered should arrive tomorrow." "Gloria," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "we need to talk about the credit card charges." She waved dismissively. "Ethan always said I should treat this as my home too. And really, the children need proper guidance. That tutor comes highly recommended. You had no right." "I have every right," she cut in, her voice sharp. "I sold my house to be closer to my family. Everything I'm doing is for this family's benefit. Unlike some people, I think about the future." "What's that supposed to mean?" Gloria finally looked up, her expression eerily calm. "Well, dear, let's be honest. Working from home, letting the children play those violent video games, serving processed foods. These aren't exactly hallmarks of good parenting, are they?" Before I could respond, my phone chimed with an email. It was from my biggest client, canceling our afternoon video call because they'd received a concerning email about my professional setup being compromised. "Did you?" I stared at Gloria. "Did you contact my client?" I merely suggested that conducting business calls from a family home might not be the most professional arrangement. She smiled. "I'm sure they appreciated the heads up about privacy concerns." My vision blurred with anger. "You had no right to interfere with my work." "Oh, Sawyer," Gloria sighed, arranging another photo frame on my former desk. "I know change is difficult, but you'll thank me later. Now, about the children's new schedule. Get out." The words came out barely above a whisper. "Ibiyo pardon." "Get out of my office. Now." Gloria's face hardened. "I've raised a child. I've taught hundreds more. I think I know what's best." "What's best?" I laughed, a harsh sound that surprised even me. "You want to know what's best? Not undermining my career. Not stealing our money. Not trying to take over my children's lives. I see Ethan was right about your tendency toward hysteria," Gloria said quietly. "We'll discuss this later when you're more rational. Oh, and dear? The condo I put a deposit on? It's not just an investment. Consider it my permanent residence. We're going to be seeing a lot more of each other." She brushed past me, leaving behind the scent of her perfume and the crushing realization that this wasn't a temporary invasion. This was just the beginning of her takeover plan. My phone buzzed again, another client rescheduling. As I watched my professional life unravel in real time, I knew something had to give. And soon, Jack's scream echoed through the house, sending me running upstairs. I found him in his room, frantically pulling books from his shelves while Gloria stood by the doorway, arms crossed. "My comics." His voice cracked as he turned to me, tears streaming down his face. "They're gone. All of them. I took care of those inappropriate materials," Gloria announced, her tone suggesting she'd done us all a favor. "A growing boy needs proper literature. I've replaced them with some classic novels, the kind your father read at his age." I stared at the pile of leather-bound books on Jack's desk, then at my son's devastated face. Those comics weren't just entertainment, they were his prized possessions. Some were rare editions Ethan and I had tracked down for his birthday, others were gifts from friends. They represented years of collecting. "Where are they, Gloria?" "The garbage collectors came this morning." She smiled, pleased with herself. "I must say, it feels wonderful to finally address this issue. Those violent pictures were rotting his brain." Jack slumped onto his bed, shoulders shaking. I sat beside him, pulling him close while my mind raced through possibilities. Thursday pickup meant the truck was probably still in the neighborhood. "Get your shoes on," I told Jack. "We're going comic hunting." Gloria stepped into the room. "Now, Sawyer, don't undermine my authority. Jack needs to learn." "Your authority?" I stood up slowly. "You have no authority here." "None. I am his grandmother, who just threw away hundreds of dollars worth of his personal property without permission." I grabbed my keys. "Jack's shoes. Now." We spent the next hour following the garbage truck's route, but it was too late. Jack's collection was gone, buried somewhere in the back of a compactor headed for the landfill. When we returned home, I found Ella hiding in the garden, her small hands covered in dirt. "Grandma said I can't plant flowers anymore," she whispered. "She says it's unladylike and I'll ruin my hands." Something snapped inside me. I marched into the house, finding Gloria rearranging my living room furniture again. "We need to talk," I said. "About Jack's improvement plan? I've already enrolled him in Latin classes." Much more suitable than those cartoon books. About you leaving. Gloria froze, then slowly turned to face me. I see what's happening here. You feel threatened because the children are finally getting proper guidance. Ethan warned me about your insecurities. Excuse me. He confided in me, dear. About your resistance to traditional values, your modern parenting notions. She adjusted a picture frame with deliberate precision. He agrees the children need more structure. My phone buzzed, a text from Ethan. Mom called. Maybe we should let the kids try some of her suggestions? Keep the peace. I felt the walls closing in. Gloria had somehow managed to turn my own husband against me, using his lifelong pattern of seeking her approval to manipulate the situation. The children are fine, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. They were happy, well-adjusted, and thriving before you arrived. The only problem here is you. Well, Gloria's eyes narrowed. We'll see what Ethan thinks about that when he gets home. I've already invited the new tutor for dinner to discuss the children's deficiencies. She brushed past me, pausing at the doorway. Oh, and I took the liberty of canceling Ella's garden club. She'll be starting ballet instead. Much more appropriate for a young lady. I watched her disappear upstairs, probably to rearrange another room of my house. Through the window, I could see Jack sitting in the backyard, staring at the spot where he used to read his comics. Ella was still hiding among her flowers, likely wondering if they'd be the next things taken away. This wasn't just about me anymore. Gloria wasn't just trying to take over my home. She was systematically destroying everything that made my children unique, happy, and confident. And somehow, she'd managed to convince Ethan it was all for the best. I pulled out my phone and started searching. If Gloria wanted to play games, fine. But she wasn't the only one who could make plans. It was time to fight fire with fire, or in this case, something with 8 legs. I found Lila Torres's art studio tucked between a coffee shop and a vintage bookstore. The window display featured elaborate spider sculptures made from twisted metal and dark glass. Perfect. So let me get this straight, Lila said, twirling a purple-streaked lock of hair. You want me to transform your house into a spider-themed nightmare to drive out your mother-in-law? She has severe arachnophobia, I explained, watching Lila sketch quick designs. And she's destroying my family. Say no more. Lila's pencil moved faster. I've got an installation that'll make your place look like the set of Arachnophobia Meets Modern Art. When do we start? That evening, I convinced Gloria to attend her church group's potluck dinner. As soon as she left, Lila arrived with her team. We had 4 hours. Mom's really afraid of spiders? Jack asked, helping unpack boxes of decorations. Terrified, Ethan confirmed, surprising me with his enthusiasm. Remember when she found that tiny spider in her garden and refused to go outside for a week? Ella looked up from the box she was exploring. Is this mean? I paused, her question hitting harder than expected. Sometimes, I said carefully, we have to be a little mean to protect what matters. Lila's team worked efficiently. Subtle spider web patterns appeared on the walls, nearly invisible until they caught the light. Delicate metal sculptures hung from corners, casting spindly shadows. The piece de resistance was the guest room, my former office, where an enormous abstract spider sculpture dominated the ceiling, its legs stretching down the walls. It's beautiful, Lila declared, stepping back to admire her work. In a creepy, unsettling way. We finished just as Gloria's car pulled into the driveway. The kids retreated to their rooms, and Ethan and I positioned ourselves in the kitchen, trying to act natural. Gloria burst through the door, clutching her casserole dish. That potluck was dreadful. Nobody appreciated my traditional recipes. Now about tomorrow's schedule. She stopped mid-sentence, staring at the wall where the light had caught one of the web patterns. What is that? What's what? I asked innocently. Gloria stepped closer, squinting. Her face paled as she noticed more webs, then the subtle sculptures in the corners. Are those spiders? Oh, those. Ethan's voice was casual. Just some new art we picked up. Very modern. Gloria's hands began to shake. Take them down. Right now. But they're part of our new decor, I said. The artist spent hours installing them. Besides, they're not real spiders. I don't care what they are. Gloria's voice rose. This is completely inappropriate. I won't stay in a house with these. These things. Well, I said slowly, you could always move into that condo you put a deposit on. The one you bought with our money. Gloria's eyes narrowed. Ethan, are you going to let her speak to me this way? Actually, Mom, Ethan stepped forward. We need to talk about those credit card charges. This is ridiculous. Gloria sputtered. I'm going to my room. We followed her upstairs, watching as she opened the guest room door and froze. The massive spider sculpture loomed above, its shadows dancing in the evening light. Gloria screamed. Take it all down, she demanded, backing away. This instant. No, I said quietly. This is our house, Gloria. Our rules. Our choices. If you don't like it, you know where the door is. You planned this, she whispered, realization dawning. You're trying to drive me out. Like you tried to drive out everything that makes my children happy? I countered. Their comics? Their gardens? Their choices. Gloria turned to Ethan, tears welling up. You're choosing her over your own mother? I'm choosing my family, he replied. All of it, including boundaries. Gloria's face hardened. Fine, if that's how you want to play this. She pulled out her phone. I still have that condo deposit. And when the children realize what a mistake this is, they'll know where to find their grandmother. As she stormed out, I caught a glimpse of something in her expression. Not just anger, but fear. Fear of losing control, of being alone, of becoming irrelevant. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered Jack's comics in the garbage, Ella's abandoned garden, and my determination hardened. Sometimes protecting your family means making difficult choices. And this was just the beginning. I thought Gloria's departure meant victory. I was wrong. The next morning, Child Protective Services showed up at our door. We received an anonymous report, the social worker said, flipping through her notes. Concerns about an unsafe home environment, psychological manipulation of minors, and... She paused, frowning. Disturbing decorative choices meant to inflict emotional distress? My stomach dropped as I invited her in. The spider installations, which had seemed like such a clever plan yesterday, now felt like evidence against us. I watched her take photos, noting every web pattern and shadow-casting sculpture. The children's grandmother provided extensive documentation, she continued, gesturing to a thick folder, including receipts for educational materials that were allegedly destroyed, records of canceled enrichment activities, and concerning text messages. Of course, Gloria had kept records. She'd been a teacher for 30 years. Documentation was second nature to her. My phone buzzed. Ethan, Mom's lawyer, called. She's suing for grandparents' rights and partial custody. Claims were unstable. The social worker interviewed Jack and Ella separately. Through the closed door, I heard Jack's voice crack as he described losing his comics. Ella talked about her garden, then burst into tears. Mrs. Bennett, the social worker said afterward, we have some concerns. This isn't what it looks like, I started, but she held up her hand. We have reports of you using psychological warfare against a family member, disrupting the children's educational progress, and creating an environment of hostility and fear. That's not. Your mother-in-law provided evidence of her attempts to enhance the children's education, while you appear to have deliberately triggered her documented medical condition to drive her away. A knock at the door interrupted us. Lila stood there, looking uncomfortable. Sorry, but I need to remove the installations. The invoice wasn't paid. I closed my eyes. Gloria had canceled the payment. Mrs. Bennett, the social worker continued, given the circumstances, we're recommending a temporary custody evaluation. The children will stay with their grandmother during this process. No, I whispered. You can't. Mom. Jack appeared in the doorway, his face pale. Grandma's here with police officers. I rushed to the front door. Gloria stood on our porch, flanked by 2 officers and a man in a suit I assumed was her lawyer. She'd traded her usual floral dress for a conservative business suit. This gives us temporary custody, the lawyer said, holding out papers. Given the documented psychological abuse and unsafe living conditions, the court agreed to an emergency order. Unsafe? I sputtered. You're the one who. Now, dear, Gloria cut in smoothly. Let's not make this more traumatic for the children than necessary. Jack, Ella, pack your overnight bags. Grandmother will help you get settled in the new condo. I watched, paralyzed, as my children were led away. Ella looked back once, tears streaming down her face. Jack wouldn't meet my eyes at all. This is what happens, Gloria murmured as she passed me, when you try to outsmart someone with decades of experience handling difficult situations. I taught middle school for 30 years, dear. Did you really think your little spider trick would work? After they left, I found Ethan sitting in Jack's room, holding one of his son's abandoned action figures. The lawyer says fighting this could take months, he said quietly. Mom's documented everything. Every conversation, every decision we made. She's painted us as unstable parents who used psychological torture against a vulnerable elderly woman. We were protecting our family, I said, but the words felt hollow. Were we? Ethan looked up, his eyes red. Because right now our kids are sleeping in another house, probably terrified and confused. And the worst part? Legally speaking, we gave Gloria everything she needed to take them. I sank down beside him, the action figure between us like a tiny plastic accusation. The spider decorations that had seemed so clever now felt childish, petty. We'd tried to fight manipulation with manipulation, and Gloria had turned our own weapon against us. My phone buzzed one last time, a message from Gloria. The children are settled in nicely. Jack's new Latin tutor starts tomorrow. Isn't it wonderful how everything worked out for the best? I stared at the message until the screen went dark, reflecting my own defeated expression back at me. We'd lost more than a battle with Gloria. We'd lost our children. 3 days after losing our children, Gloria called to say Jack had fallen ill. When we arrived at her condo, we found our son perfectly healthy, sitting at a desk covered in Latin worksheets. A small miscommunication, Gloria said, not even pretending to look apologetic. But since you're here, we should discuss the children's future. The condo was a museum of forced perfection. Classical music played softly in the background. Ella sat ramrod straight at a small table, practicing cursive. No dirt under her fingernails, no joy in her eyes. Jack, I said, keeping my voice steady, why don't you show your dad your room? Once they left, I turned to Gloria. Enough games. What do you want? Want? Gloria adjusted a perfectly positioned flower arrangement. I want what's best for my grandchildren. Structure. Discipline. Proper education. You mean control? I mean salvation from your permissive parenting. She smiled thinly. Though I am willing to negotiate visitation rights. Negotiate? I stepped closer. These are our children, not bargaining chips. Children who are finally thriving under proper guidance. Gloria gestured to Ella's perfect handwriting. No more comic books or dirt digging. Real achievements. Something in Ella's posture caught my attention. Her shoulders trembled slightly, her pencil pressing too hard against the paper. She wasn't practicing cursive, she was drawing tiny flowers in the margins, then quickly erasing them. Ella, sweetie, I said softly, what happened to your garden? Grandmother says ladies don't play in dirt, she whispered, not looking up. And Jack's new Latin tutor? I asked Gloria. How's that going? Excellent. He's finally learning something worthwhile. From down the hall came the sound of breaking glass, followed by Jack's voice. I hate this. I hate all of this. We rushed to find Jack standing amid the shattered remains of a crystal vase, tears streaming down his face. I don't want to learn Latin. I don't want to be proper. I want to go home. Now, Jack, Gloria started, but Ethan cut her off. Stop. Just stop, Mom. His voice was different, harder than I'd ever heard it. Look at them. Really look at what you're doing to your grandchildren. I'm giving them opportunities. You're crushing them, I interrupted. Like you tried to crush Ethan. But here's what you never understood. Our kids were already thriving. Jack's comics taught him creativity and moral courage. Ella's garden showed her how to nurture life and find beauty in small things. Sentimental nonsense, Gloria scoffed, but her voice wavered. Is it? I pulled out my phone, showing her Jack's last report card. Top marks in creative writing. His teacher said his superhero stories showed exceptional empathy and understanding of complex moral choices. Ethan joined in, displaying photos on his phone. Ella's science project on plant growth won first place. Her dirt digging taught her more about biology than any textbook. But Gloria's perfectly composed facade cracked slightly. But structure, discipline. Mom, Ethan said quietly, when was the last time you saw them smile? Really smile. Gloria looked at her grandchildren, really looked at them for the first time. Jack, surrounded by broken crystal, his worksheet crumpled in his fist. Ella, her perfect posture crumbling as silent tears fell onto her cursive practice. I just wanted, she whispered, then stopped. Wanted what? I asked, gentler now. To not be alone? To feel needed? There are better ways, Gloria. We're taking our children home, Ethan said firmly. You can fight us in court, drag this out for months. Or you can realize that love isn't about control. Gloria sank into a chair, her carefully constructed world crumbling like the shattered vase. I don't know how to be any other way. Then learn, I said. Not by controlling, but by understanding. Start by really seeing who your grandchildren are, not who you want them to be. Jack moved first, picking up a piece of broken crystal. I'm sorry about the vase, grandmother. "I'm sorry about your comics," she replied, her voice barely audible. It wasn't a complete surrender, not yet. But as we gathered our children's things, I saw Gloria watching them with new eyes, seeing perhaps for the first time the damage that comes from trying to reshape someone else's joy into your own image of perfection. A month after the confrontation at Gloria's condo, I found a package on our doorstep. Inside was a collection of vintage superhero comics, first editions, carefully preserved. The note read simply, "For Jack." I was wrong. That evening, while the kids were doing homework, Gloria arrived for her first supervised visit. She stood awkwardly in our living room, clutching a gardening catalog. "I thought," she said to Ella, "we might look at some seeds for spring planting. If you're interested." Ella glanced at me before responding. "I already started my tomatoes. But you could help with the peppers." The tension in the room softened slightly. Jack emerged from his room, one of the vintage comics in hand. "This one's really good, grandmother. Want to hear about it?" Gloria sat down, her usual perfect posture relaxing just a fraction. "I would actually." I watched from the kitchen as Jack explained the complex moral dilemma facing his favorite hero. Gloria listened, really listened, asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than judgment. When Ella brought out her garden plans, Gloria didn't once mention dirty fingernails or unladylike behavior. Later, after the kids went to bed, Gloria lingered by the door. "The condo sold," she said quietly. "I'm moving to a smaller place. Still in town, but not so close." "That's probably best," I replied. "I found this while packing." She handed me a photograph. Ethan at 10 years old, reading a comic book, joy evident on his face. The last one I let him keep, before I decided he needed to grow up. I didn't understand then what I was taking away. I studied the photo, seeing echoes of Jack in young Ethan's expression. "I was so afraid," Gloria continued, "of becoming irrelevant, of being forgotten. I thought if I could shape them into my idea of success." She trailed off, shaking her head. "You don't have to be perfect to be loved, Gloria. Neither do they. I'm learning that. Slowly." She straightened her jacket, a ghost of her old formality returning. "I've enrolled in a gardening class. And a therapy group. For grandparents learning to let go." As she turned to leave, I remembered something. "Wait here." I retrieved a small spider plant from my office, one of Ella's propagation projects. "It's hardy," I said, holding it out. "Thrives in most conditions. But it needs room to grow its own way." Gloria took the plant, understanding flickering across her face. "Like children. Like all of us." After she left, I found Ethan in Jack's room, arranging the vintage comics on a new bookshelf. "Mom called her lawyer," he said. "She's dropping everything. No more custody battles, no more court dates." "Good." I picked up one of the comics. Though I have to admit, I never expected vintage comics as a peace offering. "She's trying," Ethan said softly. "It's not perfect, but it's something." The next morning, I noticed new growth in Ella's garden. Tiny shoots breaking through the soil where she and Gloria had planted pepper seeds. Beside them stood a small sign in Gloria's precise handwriting. "Growth takes time. Love takes patience." I thought about the spider decorations, still packed away in our garage. Our attempt at revenge had backfired spectacularly, yet somehow led us to a better resolution than I'd imagined possible. Not through forcing Gloria out, but by making her see what she was really losing. Jack's voice drifted from his room as he read his new comics. Ella hummed in her garden. From the kitchen came the sound of Ethan making breakfast. Normal sounds, ordinary moments. The very things Gloria had tried to perfect right out of existence. My phone buzzed with a text from Gloria. "The spider plant looks lovely in my window, though I prefer to think of it as a friendship plant now." I smiled, typing back. "Growth takes time. Love takes patience. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's showing someone a better way to love, messy, imperfect, and real. Like superhero comics and dirt under fingernails, like spider plants reaching for light in their own unique way. And sometimes, just sometimes, it's about learning to let go of the need for revenge altogether."
My entire life was flipped upside down the day my parents sat me down and announced they were divorcing. When I was 12, I believed that divorces were reserved for argumentative couples. You know, the ones who shouted about money and banged doors. However, my parents were always quite courteous to one another. I assumed they were simply busy, even though it had been a long time since we had gone on a family trip. Candy, my mother responded in an oddly serene tone. Your father and I have something to tell you. I sat on the couch and watched them, keeping a safe distance from one another. Dad cleared his throat. He declared, "We've decided to get divorced," as if he were announcing that we would be eating pizza for supper. In anticipation of the joke, I blinked, but it never materialized. But why was what I eventually managed to get out. Mom stroked my hand as she reached out. Sweetheart, sometimes people grow apart. I've discovered other individuals who I want to be with, along with your father. Dad gave a nod. I'm about to move out. You will live with your mother, but occasionally you will also stay with me. I sat there attempting to take in this shocking revelation. What was I meant to do while my parents were splitting up for other people? Accepted. Who are these other people? My voice sounded distant and little as I asked. For the first time, I saw that Mom's grin fell short of her eyes. You'll get to meet them shortly. Both of my friends' daughters are around your age. Wouldn't that be pleasant? Nice. I was supposed to think it was good that my parents were blowing apart our family. Dad went on to say, and my partner has a son, as if to sweeten the pot. I sprang to my feet, almost toppling the coffee table. I don't want any more siblings. I desire that we remain together. I hurried to my room, threw myself on the bed, and closed the door. Downstairs, I could hear them conversing softly, most likely trying to figure out how to further reorganize my existence. I reflected on how Mom and Dad had taken me out individually during the past few months. One Saturday, Dad and I would go to the movies, and the next weekend, Mom and I would go to a cafe. Having one-on-one time with each of them struck me as cool. I now understood that it was only the beginning. The weeks that followed flew by. After packing his things, Dad left to live with his new bride. They had apparently already been married in a brief ceremony. As Dad had predicted, she had a boy. We moved in with Mom's new spouse in the interim. A year younger than me, he brought his twin daughters. I was a little excited at first. I'd always wanted a sister to chat to late at night about life, boys, and other things, and to share secrets with. I made an effort to be amiable the day they moved in. Hello, Aunt Candy, I said with a smile to the females. Do you want me to give you a tour? The taller one, Brittany, I believe, gave me a wide-eyed stare as if I were something stuck to her shoe. No thanks, she responded in a contemptuous tone. We don't need your help. Her sister gave her a nod of approval. Yes, and we are not your sisters, just to be clear. You're just too much. I felt like I was slapped across the face by the burn. They pushed by me, laughing to themselves, and I remained there, gaping. I listened to the noises of my new family getting settled as I lay in bed that night. I was unfamiliar with my own house. Things worsened the next day. The twins were dressed like me when I got home from school. Hey, I said, startled. Those are mine. Brittany gave an eye roll. We could borrow them, Mom suggested. Stop being so self-centered. I turned to my mother for support, but she only grinned. Now sharing is caring, Candy. All the females desire is to be accepted. Greetings. One of my fave shirts was on them. I fought back tears as I stomped up to my room. It became evident over the next few days that I was no longer Mom's world. She lavished the twins with new toys and clothing. My belongings began to vanish. They were handed away to my new sisters without my consent. One day, I overheard Mom talking to her new husband. The girls need new phones, she was saying. We could use the money we set aside for Candy's birthday. My birthday? She was going to skip my birthday for them. When the day came, Mom barely remembered. Oh, honey, she said distractedly when I reminded her. I'm so sorry, but the girls have a big sports event today. We'll celebrate another time, okay? but we never did. I thought things might be better at Dad's place, where I stayed every other weekend, but I was wrong about that too. Dad's new wife was pregnant, and she had no time for me and her son. He was a nightmare. One night, I woke up to a tickling sensation on my face. I opened my eyes and saw a huge spider sitting on my nose. I screamed, flailing around in panic. The whole house came running as the lights flicked on. I saw it wasn't a real spider, but a plastic toy, and there was Dad's stepson grinning in the doorway. "What's going on?" Dad's wife demanded, her pregnant belly leading the way as she waddled into the room. Candy woke us all up with her screaming, the boy said innocently over the toy. "You little..." I started, but Dad's wife cut me off. "Honestly, Candy, what is wrong with you? Are you some kind of hysterical lunatic?" I turned to Dad, expecting him to defend me, but he just stood there looking uncomfortable. "He put it there." I insisted. "He knows I'm afraid of spiders." "Don't be ridiculous," his wife snapped. "Stop lying and go to sleep. I don't want to see you for the rest of the night." I looked at Dad again, silently begging him to say something, anything, but he just sighed and said, "I'll take you home in the morning, Candy." As they all filed out, leaving me alone in the dark, I realized something. I didn't have a home anymore. I was alone. Life at Mom's house didn't get any better. The twins, emboldened by Mom's constant praise and attention, became downright cruel. One afternoon, I came home to find my favorite mug shattered on the kitchen floor. The twins were standing there, looking innocent as angels. "Oh, Candy," Brittany said, her voice syrupy sweet. "We're so sorry. We were just trying to make you some tea, and it slipped." I knew it was a lie. They'd never done anything nice for me, let alone make me tea. But before I could say anything, Mom and my stepdad walked in. "What's going on here?" Mom asked. Candy broke her mug, the other twin piped up. She got angry and smashed it. My stepdad's face darkened. Without a word, he grabbed my arm and led me to the small storage room at the end of the hall. It was dark and musty, filled with old boxes and forgotten junk. "You'll stay in here until you learn to control your temper," he said, pushing me inside. But I didn't do anything. I cried, but he just shut the door, leaving me in darkness. I heard giggling outside the door. It was the twins. "Hey, Candy," one of them called through the wood. "Did you know this room is full of spiders? Big, hairy ones that come out in the dark." I huddled in the corner, trying not to panic. I knew they were lying, but the darkness seemed to crawl around me. Every little sound made me jump. Hours passed. Nobody came to let me out, not even Mom. When the door finally opened, it was morning. Mom stood there looking tired. "I hope you've learned your lesson," she said. "Now get ready for school." I tried to tell her what really happened, but she just waved me off. That was when I realized Mom would always believe them over me. I started spending more and more time at my Aunt Sarah's house. She was Dad's sister, and she lived with her husband, Uncle Tom. They didn't have kids of their own, so they were always happy to see me. At first, I just visited for a few hours after school, but those hours turned into days, and soon I was spending weeks at a time with them. One day, after I'd been at Aunt Sarah's for almost a month, my teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, showed up at Mom's house for a home visit. I wasn't there, of course, but I heard about it later from a neighbor kid who saw the whole thing. Mrs. Rodriguez knocked on the door, looking concerned. When Mom answered, the teacher asked to see me. "Oh, Candy's with her father," Mom said dismissively. Mrs. Rodriguez frowned. "That's odd. I just called Mr. Johnson, and he said Candy was living with you." Mom's face went pale. "What?" But I thought. Mrs. Rodriguez was furious. She contacted Child Protective Services, and before I knew it, we were all headed to court. I sat in the courtroom, now 14 years old, watching as my parents argued over who should take care of me. Me. But it wasn't the kind of argument I'd expected. "You take her," Dad shouted at Mom. "I have a small child. I don't have time for a teenager." Mom scoffed. "Are you kidding? I have a life now. I can't deal with Candy's drama." I sat there, feeling smaller and smaller as they tossed me back and forth like a hot potato. Neither of them wanted me. But then Aunt Sarah stood up. "Your Honor," she said, her voice clear and strong. "If I may, Tom and I would like to take custody of Candy." The courtroom went silent. I looked at Aunt Sarah in shock. She smiled at me, then turned back to the judge. She handed some papers to the judge. "These documents show our financial stability. I'm a teacher and Tom's a doctor. We can provide for Candy in every way." The judge looked over the papers, then looked at me. "Candy," he said gently, "you're old enough to have a say in this. Who do you want to live with?" I didn't hesitate. "Aunt Sarah and Uncle Tom," I said, my voice shaking but certain. I saw the relief on my parents' faces. They didn't even try to hide it. Over the next few weeks, I settled into my new life. Aunt Sarah and Uncle Tom weren't just taking care of me. They were parenting me. They asked about my day, helped me with my homework, and actually listened when I talked. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, Uncle Tom asked, "So, Candy, what should we call each other now that we're officially your guardians?" I thought for a moment. These people had shown me more love in a few weeks than my own parents had in years. "Could I call you Mom and Dad?" I asked hesitantly. Aunt Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, sweetie, we'd be honored." From that day on, they were Mom and Dad to me. My birth parents became distant memories, people I thought about less and less as time went on. My new life wasn't just about Aunt Sarah and Uncle Tom. Though I also got to know Uncle Tom's mother, my new grandmother. She lived nearby and quickly became one of my favorite people in the world. Grandma was a retired doctor, and she had this way of making everything interesting. We'd spend hours in her garden, planting vegetables and flowers while she told me stories about her days in the hospital. I realized I also wanted to become a doctor. With Grandma's help and the unwavering support of my new parents, I threw myself into my studies. Before I knew it, it was time for high school graduation. As I stood in my cap and gown, scanning the audience, I saw the faces of the people who truly mattered. Mom, Dad, and Grandma, all beaming with pride. My birth parents weren't there. They hadn't even sent a card. I applied to medical college and, to my delight, got accepted on a full scholarship. Life was good. I had a loving family, a clear goal, and a bright future ahead of me. 3 years flew by in a whirlwind of lectures, late-night study sessions, and clinical rotations. Every time I put on my white coat, I felt a surge of pride knowing I was living the dream Grandma had helped nurture. That's why, when Mom and Aunt Sarah called me that rainy Tuesday afternoon, I knew something was terribly wrong before she even spoke. "Candy, honey," she said, her voice cracking. "It's Grandma. She's gone." The world stopped spinning. Grandma gone? It couldn't be. We had plans to review my latest paper this weekend. She was supposed to be at my graduation in a year. The next few days passed in a blur of tears and hushed conversations as we prepared for the funeral. I stood between Mom and Dad, Aunt Sarah and Uncle Tom, feeling like a little girl again, lost and scared. But then came the reading of the will. To my beloved granddaughter, Candy, the lawyer read, "I leave my entire estate, including my house and all my savings, amounting to $1,980,000. I gasped, looking around the room in shock. This had to be a mistake. But Mom and Dad were nodding, small smiles on their tear-stained faces. Grandma talked to us about this, Dad explained later. She wanted to make sure you had a solid foundation for your future. We agreed it was the right thing to do. As the dust settled and I tried to come to terms with my newfound wealth, life threw me another curveball. My phone started ringing with unfamiliar numbers. When I finally answered one, I nearly dropped the phone in shock. "Candy, hi, it's your mother." I hadn't heard her voice in years, but before I could respond, she rushed on. "I've been thinking about you so much lately. How are you? Where are you studying? We should catch up." Over the next few days, similar calls came in from my birth father. Suddenly, they were both intensely interested in my life, asking to meet, talking about how much they missed me. Confused and a little suspicious, I mentioned it to Mom and Dad over dinner one night. To my surprise, they burst out laughing. "Oh, Candy," Mom said, wiping tears of mirth from her eyes. "I hate to say it, but I think they might have caught wind of your inheritance." Part of me wanted to ignore them, to pretend I'd never gotten those calls, but another part, a part I had long since buried, was curious. What would it be like to see them again? To show them the woman I'd become without their help? Maybe I should meet them, I said slowly, just to see what they want. Mom and Dad exchanged a look. "If that's what you want to do, we'll support you," Mom said. "But be careful, sweetie. People can surprise you, and not always in a good way." The next day, I found myself standing on the familiar porch of my childhood home. I took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. The door swung open, and there she was, my birth mother. For a moment, we just stared at each other. "Candy," she breathed, her eyes welling up with tears. "Oh, my baby girl." She pulled me into a hug that felt stiff and awkward. Over her shoulder, I could see my stepfather and the twins hovering in the background, plastered with smiles on their faces. Come in," my mother urged, ushering me inside. Dinner was a strange affair. The twins were sickeningly sweet, a far cry from the cruel girls I remembered. "We're so glad you're here, Candy," one of them simpered. "I think we've missed you so much." I caught the flash of irritation in her eyes that brightened her words, but I just smiled and nodded. As we ate, the conversation took a turn. My mother glanced around the dining room, sighing dramatically. "This old house," she said, shaking her head. "It's seen better days, hasn't it? The roof needs replacing, and don't even get me started on the plumbing." I took a sip of water, saying nothing. My stepfather chimed in, and of course, with the girls heading to college soon, well, you know how expensive that can be. I pretended to be very interested in my mashed potatoes. "It's such a shame," my mother continued, her voice dripping with fake concern. "The girls are so bright, but with our financial situation," she trailed off, looking at me expectantly. I met her gaze evenly, but said nothing. The silence stretched on, growing more uncomfortable by the second. Finally, I decided to change the subject. "So," I said brightly, "I've been wondering, what grades did I graduate high school with? I can't quite remember." The color drained from my mother's face. She opened and closed her mouth a few times, looking like a fish out of water. "Well, that is, it was so long ago." Well, my version was completely confirmed. She didn't know anything about my life, my achievements, or my struggles. All she knew was that I had money now. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. "I think I know why you invited me here," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "It's about my inheritance, isn't it?" The room went silent. My stepfather's face turned red, and the twins suddenly found their plates very interesting. "How can you say that?" My mother gasped, but her eyes gave her away. There was no warmth there, no motherly love, just calculation and disappointment. "Now, Candy," my stepfather started, but I cut him off. "No, I'm done here. Don't contact me again." And with that, I walked out into the cool night air, leaving behind the echoes of their angry shouts and my own past. I didn't need their approval or their love. I had a real family waiting for me at home. Just a few days later, I found myself standing at my father's front door. The door swung open, revealing my stepmother. Her face contorted into what I assumed was meant to be a welcoming smile, but looked more like she'd just bitten into a lemon. I forced a smile back and stepped inside. As we moved into the living room, I noticed a teenage boy lounging on the couch. He looked up as we entered, and I recognized him instantly, the spider thrower. He had grown up quite a bit, and to my surprise, he gave me a genuinely friendly smile. "Hey, Candy," he said, standing up. "Long time no see. I'm Jake, in case you forgot." Before I could respond, a whirlwind of pigtails and glitter burst into the room. A little girl, no more than 8, skidded to a stop in front of me, her eyes wide. "Who are you?" she demanded. My father, looking older and more tired, cleared his throat. "Lily, this is your sister, Candy." We settled into an awkward conversation, my stepmother peppering me with questions about my life that I answered as vaguely as possible. Jake, surprisingly, seemed genuinely interested, asking about my medical studies with what appeared to be real curiosity. As the evening wore on, I could feel the conversation steering towards the real reason for this reunion. My father kept glancing at my stepmother, who would nod slightly, urging him on. Finally, he cleared his throat. "So, Candy," he began, his voice overly casual, "we heard about your windfall." I tensed, waiting for what was coming next. "You know, Lily here is quite the little genius," he continued. "We've been thinking of sending her to this prestigious private school, but, well, it's not cheap." I said nothing, my face carefully blank. My stepmother jumped in. "What your father is trying to say, Candy, is that we could use some help for Lily's future. You understand." I took a deep breath, feeling my patience wearing thin. "Why now?" I asked, looking directly at my father. "Why are you only remembering me now that I have money?" The room went deadly silent. Even Lily, who had been playing with her dolls, seemed to sense the tension. My father started to stammer out an excuse, but my stepmother's face suddenly twisted with anger. "Now you listen here," she hissed, all pretense of kindness gone. "You're obligated to help your family. If you don't, we'll take you to court. We'll demand our share of that money you owe us." I couldn't help it. I laughed. "Actually," I said, standing up, "according to the law, you're not my family at all. You abandoned me, remember? Aunt Sarah and Uncle Tom are my legal parents now." As I walked out the door, I heard my stepmother's shrill voice and my father's angry shouts, but I didn't look back. I got into my car and drove away, feeling a mix of emotions, sadness, anger, but mostly relief. In the days following my visit to my birth parents, my phone buzzed incessantly. Calls, texts, and voicemails poured in from both of them, each more desperate than the last. "Candy, please," my mother's voice pleaded in one message. "We're about to lose the house. We'll be on the streets. Don't you care?" My father's approaches ranged from guilt-tripping to outright demands. "After everything we've done for you," one text read, "this is how you repay us." I let them all go unanswered. I focused instead on my studies, throwing myself into my final year of college with renewed determination. I was studying a really complicated cardiology textbook one evening when a strange call appeared on my phone. With hesitation, I replied, "Hi, Candy. Jake is here. I suppose you're a stepbrother. Now, I realize this is strange, but I wanted to express my regret for the spider incident that occurred years ago. It was a really poor decision. In spite of everything, I couldn't help but smile. That was a long time ago, Jake. Water under the bridge. Really, no, he emphasized. For years, I felt guilty about it. I intended to apologize sooner, but you never returned. Furthermore, I assure you that this has nothing to do with money. I suppose I simply wanted you to know that I've grown out of that dumb child. It was heartwarming how sincere he was. Thanks for that, Jake. Actually, in the end, we spoke for more than an hour. Jake was an engineering student in his first year of college. He wasn't the spoiled child I recalled. Instead, he was humorous and self-deprecating. We had decided to get coffee together the following week at the conclusion of the call. Jake and I became true friends as the months went by. Finding a connection with someone from my previous life was odd, but it was satisfying. He became a pillar of support in my life, and we frequently got together for study sessions or coffee. In the meantime, my life was accelerating at an uncontrollable rate. When I eventually stepped on stage and accepted my college graduation, the long nights and difficult tests were worthwhile. I noticed Mom, Dad, and Jake applauding enthusiastically as I peered out into the crowd. Joy and appreciation filled my heart. Eventually, my biological parents' messages became less frequent. Jake informed me that they were having financial difficulties, but I stayed away. It was just an acknowledgement that we were on separate paths, no longer motivated by resentment or hatred. I was having coffee with Jake one day when he brought up his younger sister. Lily, my half-sister. She's very intelligent, he said. I read constantly and have questions about everything. But my stepmother and father, not that they're promoting it. I remembered the bright-eyed young girl I had met a moment before. I answered slowly, perhaps I could assist her with her schooling. Create a fund for college or anything. For her, not for them. I thought back on the path that had led me here as I drove home that night. The suffering, the desertion, the surprise inheritance. All of it had brought me to this point. Now I was Dr. Candy Johnson, and I had a promising career in medicine. I had the resources to change the life of a little girl, a loving family, and a real friend in Jake. This is my tale, Camila, and how I came to realize that sometimes the family you select matters more than the one you are born into. The sound of my younger sister's laughing permeated our home as I grew up. According to our parents, Sarah was the perfect child who could do no wrong. Me, I was only present. As Sarah performed another spontaneous fashion display for our adoring parents, I would see her dancing about the living room. She proclaimed, posing, "I'm going to be a famous model one day." Dad would give a hearty clap. My daughter is that. Before we know it, you'll be featured on magazine covers. I would roll my eyes and go to my room to read a book on economics or finance. I understood early on that I wanted more from life than merely being attractive. The gap between Sarah and myself simply deepened as we got older. While I concentrated on my schoolwork, she was all about males and parties. I hoped that my parents would recognize the importance of my efforts when it came time for me to go to college. During supper one evening, Dad said, "We'll pay for your first 2 years. After that, you're on your own." I was shocked to hear that. How about Sarah, though? Will you also force her to pay for her own education? My mother gave me a severe look. Your sister is gifted in a variety of ways. We must encourage her aspirations. I went to a different city for college after packing my bags. I put myself into my studies throughout the day since I was determined to become a financial analyst. I took on any tasks I could find at night, including teaching and waitressing. I saved every cent I made for my tuition. It was not simple. On certain evenings, I would sob myself to sleep because I was so tired and questioned whether it had all been worthwhile. But I wasn't going to give up. I was aware that education was the key to a better life, one free from the unending comparisons and letdowns of my upbringing. I saved up enough money for tuition by my third year, and I was fortunate enough to receive a full scholarship for my senior year, contingent on my academic achievement. Mom and Dad, take that. Sarah, meantime, was enjoying life at home. After a semester, she had left community college, saying it was limiting her style. When I last heard from her, she was still living with our parents while juggling part-time jobs and modeling engagements. I decided to remain in the city where I had gone to college when I graduated. It was more like home than the house I grew up in. My finance degree and the excellent feedback I received from my instructors helped me secure a position at a prominent company. Additionally, it wasn't entry-level. They saw my ability and offered me a role with actual responsibility. Like I had in college, I poured myself into my job with all my might. Long hours, early mornings, doing whatever it needed to establish my worth and demonstrate that I did. Kami, that deal you closed last week was impressive. My employer called me into his office one day. Keep this up, and you'll be looking at a promotion before you know it. I smiled proudly. I had put a lot of effort into achieving this goal, being recognized for my own worth rather than by comparison to others. Around this time, I got to know Jake. At a nearby coffee shop, we were both reaching for the same finance magazine when our hands came into contact. I realize it's corny, but there are moments when life truly does unfold like a romantic comedy. Sorry, he responded with a kind grin. You take it. I demand. Why don't we have coffee to discuss it? I proposed, startling myself with my audacity. Before I knew it, 5 years had passed quickly. That coffee date evolved into supper, which in turn led to weekend vacations. Jake was nice, driven, and supportive of my career. Everything I could have ever hoped for in a companion. In the meantime, my career took off. Every successful transaction resulted in incentives and fresh chances. I had saved enough money for a down payment on an apartment and a dependable automobile by the time I was 32. It wasn't ostentatious, but it was mine, acquired by my own tears and labor. Jake proposed to me at a handmade meal in my apartment one evening. I couldn't help but reflect on how my life had changed since I was a youngster as he put the ring on my finger. This person loved me for who I was, not for what he desired me to be. We made the decision to save money for a lavish wedding. We had both put in a lot of effort to get here, so why not have a lavish celebration? I told Jake I want it to be perfect. One evening when we were browsing wedding websites. A day that shows how far we've come. Jake gave me a hand squeeze. Love, do anything you want. You're deserving. I threw myself into wedding planning with the same enthusiasm I'd shown in my career. I subscribed to bridal magazines, joined online forums, and created mood boards. Every spare moment was spent dreaming up our perfect day. Meanwhile, life back in my hometown hadn't changed much. Sarah was still living with our parents, now with a baby in tow. The father, some guy she dated for a few months, had disappeared as soon as he'd heard the news. Your sister needs our help, Mom said during one of our rare phone calls. It's not easy being a single mother. I bit my tongue, holding back the retort that Sarah had made her own choices. Instead, I simply said, I'm sure she'll figure it out. That's the problem with you, Camilla, Mom sighed. You've always been so cold towards your family. The accusation stung, but I refused to let it get to me. I'd spent too many years trying to win their approval. Now I was focused on building my own life, my own family with Jake. One ordinary Tuesday, as I was reviewing some financial reports at work, my phone buzzed with an email notification. The sender's name made my heart skip a beat, Sarah. With a mixture of curiosity and apprehension, I opened it. What I saw made my blood run cold. It was a scanned copy of our parents' will. As I skimmed through the legal jargon, one fact became crystal clear. Sarah was the sole heir to everything our parents owned. My hands shaking, I dialed my mother's number. She picked up on the third ring. "Mom, what's this that Sarah sent me?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why am I not included?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. When she spoke again, her tone was defensive. "Camila, you're doing well for yourself. You have a good job, an apartment, a car. You don't need our money." "That's not the point," I argued, my voice rising. "I'm your daughter too. Don't I deserve?" "Your sister is struggling. Mom cut me off. She's a single mother. She has no job. We can't leave her with nothing." The conversation went on like this for a while, with me trying to understand their decision and Mom defending it. In the end, I hung up, feeling hurt, angry, and completely dismissed. Over the next few weeks, I distanced myself from my family. I stopped calling, stopped responding to messages. It hurt, but I told myself it was for the best. I had my own life now, my own family with Jake. I didn't need their approval anymore. But just as I was starting to feel at peace with my decision, life threw another curveball my way. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon. Jake and I were lounging on the couch, flipping through wedding venues online, when my phone rang. It was my mother again. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Hello, Camila." My mother's voice was strained, almost panicked. "I need surgery urgently. The insurance won't cover it all, and we need money." I closed my eyes, bracing myself for what was coming next. "How much?" $22,000, she said quietly. The amount hit me like a punch to the gut. It was a large chunk of what Jake and I had saved for our wedding. I glanced at Jake, who was watching me with concern. "I need to think about this," I told her. "I'll call you back." After I hung up, I filled Jake in on the situation. He listened thoughtfully, then said, "It's your decision, babe. But if it were my parents, I'd want to help." I nodded, torn between my lingering resentment and the desire to do the right thing. Finally, I called my mother back. "I can help," I said, "but I want to do this properly. I'll open a bank account and transfer the money there. You can pay me back gradually." To my surprise, my mother balked at the idea. No, we need cash. Can you bring it in person?" Something about her insistence on cash set off alarm bells in my head. "Mom, I can't take time off work right now, but I can pay the hospital directly if you give me the details." "No," she said quickly. I don't understand all these modern banking things. Please, Camila, cash would be easiest." I was confused and a little suspicious, but I pushed those feelings aside. This was my mother's health we were talking about. "Okay," I said finally. "I can't come myself, but Jake can bring the money. Is that all right?" She agreed, and we made the arrangements. As I hung up, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right, but I pushed those thoughts aside. After all, what could possibly go wrong? Jake left early the next morning, a briefcase containing $22,000 in cash securely tucked under his arm. I kissed him goodbye, a knot of anxiety twisting in my stomach. I asked him to be careful and to call me as soon as he was done. He nodded, giving me a reassuring smile, promising he had everything under control. Hours later, my phone buzzed with a text from Jake informing me of his arrival. I held my breath, waiting for his call. When it finally came, Jake's voice was filled with a mix of emotions as he recounted the events of his visit. Upon arriving at my parents' house, Jake found that neither of my parents was home. Instead, he was greeted by my sister, Sarah. Jake explained the purpose of his visit, stating that he had brought money intended for my mother. Sarah informed him that our mother had been admitted to the hospital and that our father had gone to visit her. She explained that they were borrowing this money to pay for our mother's operation. Despite the unexpected turn of events, Jake handed over the money to Sarah. After completing this task, he quickly excused himself and left. When Jake returned home, I was eager to hear about his trip. As he walked through the door, I rushed to greet him. "Thank you for doing this, Jake. I'm sure it will help my mom a lot." "There's something else," Jake added, looking a bit uncertain. Sarah wasn't alone in the house. There was a guy there, looked like he was living there. I blinked in surprise. A guy living there? Mom never mentioned Sarah had a boyfriend, let alone one who moved in. Jake shrugged. Yeah, he seemed pretty comfortable. I was surprised too. I sat back, processing this new information. It was strange that my mother hadn't mentioned Sarah's boyfriend. But I brushed it off as just another example of our poor communication. "Well, I'm just glad we could help with Mom's operation," I said finally. "I hope she recovers quickly." As we sat there on the couch, I felt a mix of emotions. I was worried about my mother's health, but also grateful that we had been able to help. The presence of Sarah's boyfriend at my parents' house was unexpected, but I decided not to dwell on it. After all, my family's well-being was what mattered most right now. Every day I'd call to check on my mother's progress, my heart racing each time until I heard her voice. "The operation went well, dear," she'd say, her tone reassuring. "We're so grateful for your help. I'm feeling better already." Relief washed over me with each call, but a nagging feeling persisted in the back of my mind. Something felt off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. A month passed, and I decided it was time to see for myself how my mother was doing. I took some time off work and made the journey back to my childhood home. When I arrived, I was surprised to find my mother already up and about, looking normal. There were no visible signs of her recent surgery, no hints of the illness that had allegedly threatened her life just weeks ago. "Mom," I started hesitantly, "how are you feeling after the operation?" She waved her hand dismissively, avoiding my gaze. "Oh, much better. No need to worry about all that now. Would you like some tea?" I wanted to press further, but seeing her bustling around the kitchen, I decided not to upset her. Maybe she just didn't want to relive the ordeal. My father was there too, doting on my young niece. Sarah, however, was conspicuously absent. "Where's Sarah?" I asked, watching my niece play with her toys. My mother's face lit up. "Oh, Sarah's doing so well. She's got a job now. Can you believe it? Works 7 days a week, even spends some nights there. Such a hard worker." I couldn't hide my shock. This didn't sound like the sister I knew at all. Duh, that's quite a change. "People can surprise you," my mother said, a strange smile playing on her lips. I spent 2 days with my parents, playing with my niece, and trying to reconnect with my family, but something felt off. There was an undercurrent of tension, whispered conversations that would stop when I entered the room. Finally, it was time for me to head back home. As I drove, my mind wandered, trying to make sense of this strange visit. On a whim, I pulled over at a rest stop and decided to check social media. I hadn't bothered in a while, given how distant I had become from my family. As I scrolled through Sarah's profile, my heart stopped. There in vibrant color were photos of my sister in a white gown, beaming next to a man I recognized as the one Jake had seen at the house. The caption read, "Just married. Thanks, Mom and Dad, for the amazing wedding and dream honeymoon." The pieces suddenly fell into place with sickening clarity. The money, the rushed need for cash, the evasive answers about the operation. It had all been a lie. My vision blurred as the reality of the situation hit me. Without thinking, I flung open the car door and stumbled out, gasping for air. The cool breeze did little to calm the storm of emotions raging inside me. Betrayal, anger, hurt, they all swirled together as I leaned against my car, trying to steady myself. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and dialed my mother's number. Each ring felt like an eternity until finally she answered. "Camila, is everything all right?" Her voice was casual, as if nothing was wrong. "Mom," I managed, my voice trembling. "I need you to be honest with me. What happened to the money we sent for your operation?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When she spoke again, her tone had changed. "Camila, you have to understand, there was no operation. We gave the money to Sarah for her wedding." The confirmation hit me like a physical blow. "How could you?" I whispered. "Your sister finally met a good man," my mother explained, her voice taking on a defensive edge. "We couldn't leave her without a proper wedding gift. This was her chance at happiness." Tears streamed down my face as I spoke. "Do you have any idea how hard I worked for that money? How many nights I stayed up? How many weekends I gave up? Jake and I were saving that for our own wedding." There was a moment of silence before my mother responded, her voice cold and indifferent. "You're smart, Camila. You can always earn more." Her callous response sparked a fire of anger within me. "I want the money back," I demanded. "All of it, now." To my shock, my mother laughed. It was a harsh, mirthless sound that sent chills down my spine. "Oh, Camila," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You can't prove you gave us any money." "What?" I gasped. "Jake brought it to you. He gave it to Sarah." "Did he now?" My mother's voice was sickeningly sweet. "That's not how I remember it. If you try to take this to court, I'll tell them your boyfriend is a fraud, that he took the money for himself and never gave us a cent." I felt like I was going to be sick. "You wouldn't," I challenged. "It's your word against ours, dear. And let's face it, who would believe the daughter who's barely spoken to her family in years over her poor, struggling sister and her devoted parents?" Before I could respond, the line went dead. I stared at my phone in disbelief, my mother's words echoing in my ears. The depth of their betrayal was staggering. Not only had they lied to me and stolen from me, but now they were threatening to paint Jake as a criminal if I tried to get the money back. I slumped against my car, my legs no longer able to support me. How had it come to this? My own family, the people who were supposed to love and support me unconditionally, had manipulated and betrayed me in the worst possible way. I stumbled through our apartment door, emotionally drained and still reeling from the conversation with my mother. Jake was there in an instant, concern etched across his face. "Camila, what happened?" he asked, guiding me to the couch. Through tears, I recounted everything: the wedding photos, the phone call, my mother's cruel words and threats. Jake listened intently, his arms around me providing silent support. When I finished, Jake took a deep breath. "I had a feeling something wasn't right about that whole situation," he said softly. "That's why I took some precautions." Jake stood up and retrieved his laptop. "I bought a hidden camera before I went to your parents' house," he explained. "I had a hunch we might need proof of what happened." My eyes widened as Jake pulled up a video file. There on the screen was Jake handing over the cash to Sarah, clear as day. We could hear Sarah counting the money and stating it was for our mother's operation. "Jake," I whispered, "you're brilliant." He squeezed my hand. "With this, we can prove what really happened. Your mother can't deny it or threaten to accuse me of fraud." The next day, we met with a lawyer. After reviewing our evidence, she was confident we had a strong case. "It won't be a quick process," she warned us. "These things take time. But with this video, I believe we'll win." As we left the lawyer's office, Jake turned to me. "You know, we don't have to put our lives on hold while this plays out," he said. "Why don't we get married now?" I looked at him, surprised. "But what about the big wedding we were planning?" Jake shook his head. "That doesn't matter. What matters is us starting our life together. We don't need a lavish party for that." Over the next few weeks, we planned a small, intimate ceremony. It wasn't the grand affair we'd originally envisioned, but as I stood there exchanging vows with Jake, surrounded by our closest friends, I realized this was perfect. There was a noticeable absence, my family. I hadn't called them, hadn't told them about the wedding. As much as it hurt, I knew it was for the best. As Jake and I shared our first dance as a married couple, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Yes, there was still a legal battle ahead, and the pain of my family's betrayal was still fresh. But here in this moment, surrounded by people who truly loved and supported me, I felt hope for the future. Months passed, and our lawsuit against my mother finally went to court. As we presented our evidence, including Jake's video recording, I could see the shock and disbelief on the judge's face. My mother's attempts to paint us as liars crumbled in the face of irrefutable proof. The day the verdict was announced, my phone rang. It was my mother. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? You ungrateful child." I remained silent as she ranted, listing off every perceived sacrifice they'd made for me growing up. Her words, once capable of cutting me to the core, now felt hollow. "I hope you're happy," she spat. "As of this moment, you are no longer my daughter. You're dead to me." The line went dead before I could respond. I stood there, phone in hand, feeling a mix of pain and surprisingly relief. The court ordered my mother to repay the $22,000. I later learned she had to take out a loan to cover it. Life moved on. Jake and I focused on our careers and our life together, leaving the drama of my family behind. But news still trickled in through mutual acquaintances. Sarah's marriage, it seemed, was far from the fairy tale she'd envisioned. She and her husband stayed with our parents, turning the house into a constant party zone. Neighbors complained about the noise and drunken behavior. It all came to a head when Sarah's husband, in a drunken rage, tried to kick my parents out of their own home. The police were called, and the ugly truth of their situation was laid bare for all to see. When Sarah lost custody of her daughter as a result of her careless actions, it was the last straw. After seeing the devastation Sarah had caused, my parents expelled her and her spouse. In an effort to provide their granddaughter with the secure environment Sarah was unable to offer, they brought her in. My phone rang with a familiar number just when I believed that chapter of my life was over. I replied against my better judgment. "Camilla." I hadn't heard my mother's voice so gentle in a long time. "You were missed," she remarked. Waiting for the other shoe to drop, I remained silent. It took very little time. She went on, "We need your assistance in raising your niece. We are not as youthful as we once were, and it is difficult." I felt a wave of déjà vu as she said. Indeed, history was being repeated. They were attempting to persuade me to take care of Sarah's child, even though they had previously preferred Sarah above me. I apologize. I stated firmly, I am unable to assist you. My mother objected, saying, but she's your niece. Do you not value family? I inhaled deeply. In all of this, my niece is innocent, and I wish her well in life. But you're still the same. You're still attempting to use me to correct your errors. I refuse to do it. Don't give me another call. After hanging up, I blocked her phone as well as my father's and Sarah's right away. I felt a burden leave my shoulders as I put the phone down. Later that night, Jake discovered me gazing out at the city lights from the balcony. He put his arms around me and said, "Is everything all right?" I reclined in his arms. I was surprised by how much I meant it when I said, "Yeah, I believe it is at last." Watching the world pass by, we stood in cozy stillness. I reflected on the hardships, betrayals, and difficult lessons I had learned along the way that had led me here. However, I also considered the strength I had discovered, the love I had developed with Jake, and the life we were building together. Almost as long as I've been Richard's wife, I've been a doctor. My name is Eleanor. Despite our ups and downs, those 30 years passed by as if they were insignificant. Particularly while the boys were little, the noises of life permeated our large, comfortable home. Even though our kids, James and Oliver, were quite different from one another, they each made us happy in their own unique ways. As doctors, Richard and I put a lot of effort into creating a comfortable existence. Over the years, we were able to purchase a few flats and rent them out to supplement our income. Up until the day Richard returned home looking paler and more solemn than I had seen him in years, everything seemed to be going well in my life. "Eleanor, we need to talk," he remarked solemnly as he left his medical bag by the door. "Last week, some testing were completed. The outcomes, they returned. It's cancer." The months that followed were a haze of unending waiting rooms, therapies, and hospital visits. Despite Richard's valiant efforts, the disease proved unforgiving. No amount of medical training can prepare you for the agony of seeing the strongest guy I know deteriorate. Richard clasped my hand as we sat in silence in the living room one evening. "Eleanor, you must ensure that the boys are taken care of if things don't work out for us. The will has been completed. You'll have no money problems." Shortly thereafter, he vanished. Family, friends, and coworkers attended the solemn funeral. People traveled from all around to show their condolences. However, what struck me most was the silence at home after everyone had departed. Richard used to leave his belongings in the same location. It was painful to recall and to watch. I was in the kitchen figuring out what to do with some leftover food a few days after the funeral when James barged in, his face contorted with wrath and anxiety. Oliver followed him, as if he would rather be somewhere else than here. As usual, James got right to the point when he remarked, "Mom, we need to talk about Dad's will." I put down the cling film with a groan. "Yes, I am aware of it. I inherited everything from your father. He was concerned about my well-being." James hit the counter with a smash. "How about Oliver and me? We are his sons. It's unfair that we receive nothing." Oliver spoke out now in an attempt to diffuse the situation. "James, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Mom is still in mourning. We can resolve this without conflict." James glared at him. "You're not considering the future, so it's easy for you to say." "Yes, I am." I felt the pressure of their looks as I leaned against the counter. "This was created by your father and me. I hear you, James, but Dad trusted me to take care of things. I don't intend to ignore you. So what then?" James's voice became louder as he crossed his arms. "We simply wait. Up to what point? Do you believe that now is a suitable moment to give us our portion?" I said, James, watch your tone, as my tolerance was wearing thin. I am still your mother. Oliver put his hands up like a referee and moved between us. Please, both of you. This isn't beneficial. Mom, maybe there's a middle ground here. I rubbed my temples and nodded. All right, let's do this. The downtown flats that your father and I invested in. James cut me off. Yes, those. With a glance that warned him to zip it for a minute, I went on. You each take one, I was thinking. You may live there or rent them out, and you can start with whatever you need with the savings. Let's say $225,000 apiece. James was obviously doing the arithmetic in his mind as he bit on his lip. And for the time being, the house and the money remain with me. It will come to you after I'm gone. I firmly stated, as for your father's wishes. Oliver pushed James, who appeared to want to continue the argument. Dude, let's consider this. It's a reasonable beginning. Our mother isn't abandoning us. James gave a quiet nod at last. All right, Mom, but I need this in writing. No more surprises. When I said, of course, we'll get everything documented properly, I could hear Oliver hissing at James as they walked out of the kitchen. Will you give her a break? She is trying her hardest. I didn't really want to, and James murmured something under his breath that I couldn't understand. As I washed up the dishes, I wondered if Richard could see us and what he'd think. I hoped I was doing the right thing, but only time would tell. And time, that tricky thing, wasn't always a friend. It was a sunny afternoon, a rare kind that makes everything seem all right, when James brought Isabella over to meet me for the first time. They hadn't been dating long, but James was already head over heels. You could tell by the way he was fussing over her, which wasn't like him at all. They walked in, and right off the bat, Isabella had this air about her, like she owned the place. Dressed to the nines, she breezed into my living room with barely a hello, her eyes scanning everything. Nice place you've got here, she said, flipping her hair back as she sat down without waiting for an invitation. James was grinning like a fool beside her. I forced a smile, trying to be the good host. Thank you, Isabella. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Tea? Coffee sounds lovely, she replied, then turned to James. Babe, make sure it's black, no sugar. James nodded and headed to the kitchen, which left me alone with her, sitting in my own living room, feeling like the guest. The silence was awkward until she broke it. So James tells me you're pretty well off, she started, eyeing the decor. I'm used to a certain standard, you know. My parents made sure of that. That's good to hear, I said, not sure what else to add. James came back with the coffee and handed Isabella her cup. She took a sip and made a face. It's all right. Anyway, we've been discussing our future together, planning ahead, you know. That's wise, I said, glancing at James, hoping he'd give me some clue about where this conversation was heading. Isabella set her cup down. Yeah, and speaking of planning, we were thinking about you know I want something special. James has probably told you I saw this place perfect for a rehearsal dinner, but it's a bit pricey. It's about $30,000. I choked on my coffee. $30,000 just for the rehearsal dinner. James jumped in. Mom, it's important to Bella. We want to start things off right. I put my cup down, feeling a storm brewing inside. Look, that's a lot of money for a dinner, Isabella. We need to be reasonable. Isabella's face hardened. Reasonable? James says you have the means. I don't see why we should compromise on something that important. James was nodding along with her, but I could see the unease in his eyes. He knew he was asking too much. I'm all for celebrating, I said, trying to keep my voice even. But $30,000 is beyond excessive. I can't justify that." Isabella stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I'm not used to compromising on my standards, Eleanor. I was clear with James that I expect a certain lifestyle. James tried to smooth things over. Mom, maybe we can find a middle ground." "There's no middle ground on $30,000 for a dinner, James. That's final." I snapped, losing my patience. Isabella picked up her purse, glaring at me. "Fine. If that's how it's going to be, then maybe we need to reconsider some things." They left soon after, and I sat there reeling from the encounter. The nerve of that girl coming into my home, drinking my coffee, and telling me how to spend my money. It felt like a slap in the face, a wake-up call I wasn't ready for. I was out at the grocery store when James and Isabella decided to drop by again. By the time I got home, Oliver was awkwardly entertaining them in the living room. The atmosphere was tense, the kind that makes you want to turn around and leave. But it was my house, so I braced myself and walked in. Isabella, all dolled up as usual, handed me a list as soon as I set down my grocery bags. "Eleanor, we thought a lot about the wedding gifts, and here's what we've settled on. I hope this will be easier for you to handle." I skimmed the list she first handed me. It was surprisingly sensible. Kitchen appliances, some nice china, even a couple of pieces of furniture. "This seems quite reasonable," I said, feeling a momentary relief. "I think these are wonderful choices, really." James looked at Isabella, a hopeful expression crossing his face. But just as I was about to discuss where we could buy these items, Isabella's expression changed abruptly. She gasped, "Oh no, this isn't right. Give that back." She snatched the list from my hands and rummaged through her purse, pulling out another sheet of paper. "Here's the actual list." This new list was nothing like the first. It included an apartment, a luxury car, an exclusive vacation, and even diamond jewelry. My jaw dropped. Is this some kind of joke? Isabella didn't flinch. "No joke, Eleanor. These are the gifts we expect. Only the best for our wedding." I stared at her, then at James, waiting for him to say something. Anything to suggest he didn't agree with this madness. But he just stood there, looking between us, clearly conflicted but silent. I couldn't hold back. "James, why are you letting her do this? You know this is unreasonable." Isabella cut in, her voice rising. "This doesn't concern you, Eleanor. You just need to pay up and keep quiet." That's when Oliver stood up, his face set hard. "That's enough, Isabella. You're not going to talk to our mom like that. This is her house, and you're way out of line. You need to leave now." The room was thick with tension as James and Isabella gathered their things. Isabella was muttering under her breath, clearly angry. "This is ridiculous. We'll remember this." They left, and the door slammed shut behind them. Sitting down, I felt the weight of the whole situation pressing down on me. Oliver sat beside me, putting an arm around my shoulders. "We'll figure this out, Mom. But you can't let them bully you into giving more than you can or should. It's not right." He was right, of course, but as I sat there with my son, I couldn't help but worry about James. How had things gotten so out of hand? How could he not see what this was doing to our family? The silence that followed was filled with unsaid worries and fears for the future. I knew then that this was far from over. It was only going to get tougher from here. The weeks that followed were a constant barrage of phone calls from James. Each one was more demanding than the last, his tone desperate, almost frantic at times. "Mom, you don't understand. I can't look poor next to Bella's family," he'd argue, his voice cracking with stress. "You have the money. Why can't you just help me out here?" I sat at the kitchen table, phone pressed against my ear, feeling a knot in my stomach. James, it's not about the money. It's about living within your means. Bella's expectations. You can't sustain that, not without going into serious debt. Itzkoff, his frustration boiling over. What do you know about it? I'm not going to live like a... I need more from the inheritance now. The demand is done. James, I've offered to cover half the wedding costs, up to $115,000, and give a $5,000 gift. That's more than generous. Everything has to be agreed upon with me, though. No surprises. There was a pause, then a sharp laugh from him. That's nothing. You're just being stingy. You have $1 million sitting there. Why are you holding out on me? Because it's not just about the money. I replied, my patience wearing thin. It's about not feeding into this fantasy that's going to ruin you. He yelled now, loud enough that I had to pull the phone away from my ear. I don't need this. I'll handle it my way. Forget you. And then, just like that, the call stopped. Months passed in silence. I tried to busy myself with daily routines, trying not to worry about James, but the peace was short-lived. The phone rang one afternoon, and it was my sister-in-law, Anita. Eleanor, I thought you should know. Anita's voice was hesitant, careful. James is flying all the wedding guests to Hawaii. He sold his apartment to fund it, and he expects you to get there on your own. He mentioned you weren't interested in helping. So I hung up, a mix of anger and sorrow turning inside me. How could he be so reckless? Before I could process it all, Oliver came into the room, his expression grim. Mom, there's something you need to hear. I recorded their conversation when they were sitting here in the living room. He handed me an audio recorder. I pressed play, and the voices of James and Isabella filled the kitchen. James, your mom is just a nasty old woman with a fat wallet. We need to squeeze as much as we can out of her, and then cut her off. James's voice responded, chillingly agreeable. Whatever it takes, Bella, I'm not going to let her control us. If it comes down to it, I'll kick her out in her underwear. I turned off the recorder, my hands trembling. To hear my own son speak like that about me, his mother, it was too much. The room spun as I tried to comprehend the depth of his betrayal. Flying to Hawaii was a decision I didn't make lightly. Oliver was by my side, both of us tense but determined to face whatever awaited us. When we landed and approached the venue, I was taken aback by the sheer opulence of it all. Flowers everywhere, lights strewn like stars across the evening sky, and music floating in the air. As we walked into the gathering, I spotted James and Isabella mingling with guests. They looked like a picture-perfect couple, all smiles and laughter. My heart ached to see my son so lost in this fabricated paradise. Before I could take another step towards them, Isabella spotted us. Her smile vanished, replaced by a scowl as she marched over, her high heels clicking angrily against the stone pathway. You shouldn't be here, she hissed, stopping just inches from me, her voice loud enough to draw attention. This is my day, and you're not welcome. I was stunned, but before I could respond, her parents, who had overheard, came over. Her father, a tall, stern-looking man, spoke first. Isabella, that is no way to speak to your guest, much less to James's mother. His tone was harsh, a reprimand that made her cheeks flush with embarrassment. Her mother, looking equally appalled, turned to me with an apologetic smile. Eleanor, please come with us. Let's find you a place to sit. They guided us away, leading us to a table at the edge of the setup, clearly an afterthought, with no proper setting. The ceremony started soon after, with speeches that felt hollow given the tension. Then unexpectedly, I was handed the microphone. I stood, my legs shaky but my resolve firm. I came here today to wish my son and his new wife a happy future. I began, my voice steady despite the trembling inside. But I also believe in honesty and integrity, something that's been sorely missing from the events leading up to this day. Isabella's face went from pink to red, her eyes glaring daggers at me. I was asked for money time, and again in amounts that no reasonable person would find justifiable. When I couldn't meet these demands, I was threatened with separation from my family and future grandchildren. My voice cracked a bit, but I pressed on. Oliver, seeing my distress, stepped closer, placing a supportive hand on my shoulder. I nodded at him, then turned on the audio recording he had made. Isabella's voice filled the air, cold and calculating, discussing how they would milk more money from me. James's voice agreed, saying he was prepared to leave me with nothing for the sake of his bride. The crowd murmured, the air thick with shock and disapproval. I turned off the recorder, the silence heavy. I gave my son an apartment and $25,000, and yet it was never enough. Today I'm making it clear I will not be treated as an ATM or threatened. I am done with James and Isabella. I wish them well, but from this day forward, I am choosing to remove myself from their lives. The reaction was immediate. Isabella screamed, her voice shrill and wild. "You've ruined my wedding. I curse you." After everything that had happened, coming back home was bittersweet. In the quiet, I made a decision that startled even me. I quit my job. I'd spent years healing others as a doctor, but now it was time to heal myself and rebuild the life that the recent storms had scattered. Oliver, bless his heart, had just graduated from art college and was brimming with ideas and ambition. With the $25,000 I had given him, he opened his own tattoo parlor. It wasn't just any shop. It quickly became a place where art and skin met in stunning displays. Oliver poured his soul into his work, and it paid off. He started entering tattoo contests, and soon enough, his name was on every local's lips. Before we knew it, he was opening more locations, creating a network of salons that became a hotspot for tattoo enthusiasts. I'd watch him sketch late into the night, his dedication a stark contrast to the chaos his brother had chosen. "You're doing amazing, Ollie," I'd say, pride swelling in my chest. It was during these calm months that James reappeared. One afternoon, he showed up at the door, his eyes tired, his shoulders slumped, so different from the ambitious, sharp man he once was. "Mom, I need to talk," he said, not waiting for an invitation to sit. His voice was weary, a far cry from the demanding tone I'd grown accustomed to. I sighed, motioning for him to continue. "What is it, James?" "It's Bella. She's driving me insane. Once more and more, nothing's ever enough. I got a second job, but it's still not enough for her." His words were desperate, but they couldn't erase the past so easily. "James, I warned you. I told you living like that with someone like her is unsustainable." He rubbed his face, frustration clear. I know you did, but I thought." His voice trailed off, hopelessness taking the place of explanation. "Thought what?" "That money would just appear because you wanted it to." My tone was harsh, but years of pent-up frustration made it hard to soften it. "Look at your brother. He started with the same amount and made something of himself without stepping on others." James bristled. "Yeah, well, not everyone's like Oliver, are they? I have rights to the inheritance too, remember. And when you're gone, it'll come to me." That was the last straw. "Get out, James," I said, my voice cold and resolute. "And don't come back, not this time. You chose your path." His jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought he might argue more, but then he turned and walked out the door, slamming it shut behind him. As I stood in the silence that followed, Oliver came downstairs, having heard the last part of our exchange. "Are you okay, Mom?" I nodded, wrapping my arms around him. I am now, thanks to you. Let's just focus on the good we can do and on the life we can build. He hugged me back, his presence a comforting assurance that not all was lost. In that moment, I knew that despite the hard it is, the journey was still worth it. We had each other, and that was enough to keep moving forward. After the storm had passed with James, our home settled into a calm I hadn't felt in years. It was during this quiet period that Oliver brought someone special home. Her name was Sarah, and she was everything Isabella wasn't: kind, humble, and genuinely caring. As the weeks turned into months, their relationship grew stronger, and soon they announced their engagement. The wedding, unlike the extravagant affair that was James's, was a simple, heartfelt ceremony in our backyard. Flowers from the garden, homemade decorations, and a small group of close friends and family made the day perfect. During the reception, I pulled Oliver aside. "You've chosen a wonderful woman," I said, my voice thick with emotion. He gave my hand a squeeze. His response was a knowing glance. "I learned from the best," he said. After then, life happened fast. They used some of their funds to purchase a modest but comfortable home a few miles away after selling the flat I had given Oliver. Sarah gave us some news one bright day while we were enjoying tea in their new living room. She said, "Eleanor, we're expecting twins," with delight gleaming in her eyes. I was so happy that I almost dropped my cup. "Twins? My, that's amazing." Oliver smiled, clearly proud. "We wanted to let you know first. Mom, we're very delighted." "Twins," I said again, giving the words time to register. "Grandchildren." I was excited to begin this new chapter. There wasn't much news from James. He had divorced Isabella when I last heard from him. He had to start again in another city because she had taken almost everything in the separation. It was painful to know that he was struggling someplace as a result of his decisions, even though he had inflicted agony. Oliver sat next to me one evening as I was browsing through old photo albums. A photo of James and myself from years ago caught his eye. He said, "Do you ever hear from him?" I gave a headshake. "No, even if it pains me, I have to accept that he has made his own decisions after everything." Oliver wrapped me in his arm. "Mom, he remains my brother. Perhaps he will change his mind." I never imagined how my life would unfold. This is my tale, and my name is Rita. I was raised by decent farmers who instilled in me the importance of perseverance. We began our day before dawn, taking care of the crops and animals as soon as I could walk. Back then, life was easy. After school, I would return home and assist on the farm. Weekends were spent with family and finishing off household tasks. I didn't want to and didn't know any different. But once I finished from high school, everything changed. Bless their hearts, my parents had higher hopes for me than a life on the farm. Dad stated, "Rita, we've been talking," when we were seated at the dinner table one evening. "Your mom and I think you should go to college." Suddenly, my universe grew larger. After packing my things, I moved to the city, which was so unlike from all I had ever known that it could have been another planet. College was a journey. Although the lessons were intriguing, it was the individuals I met. Children from diverse backgrounds with goals and aspirations I had never ever thought of that truly opened my eyes. Then there was Jack. In my second year, I got to know him. He was so different from the country guys back home, charming and self-assured. I believed Jack understood exactly what he wanted out of life. He would frequently remark, "Life's too short to waste it working yourself to the bone," while relaxing on the grass outside the library. We should enjoy ourselves while we're young. I fell deeply in love. This person believed that life was an adventure rather than a never-ending list of tasks. Before I knew it, we were discussing marriage after we began dating. My folks were wary when I informed them. To learn more about the guy who had captured their daughter's heart, they wanted to meet Jack. Dad remarked, "He seems nice enough," following Jack's initial visit to the property. "But I'm not sure about something. Rita, just use caution." I dismissed his worries. How much did my traditional father understand about contemporary love? We were going to have a great life together, and Jack was ideal. Thank heavens, my parents purchased us a city apartment and even covered the cost of our wedding. Mom responded, "We want you to have a good start," with teary eyes. Saying thanks, Mom and Dad, I gave them a firm embrace. "I promise I'll make you proud." I believed my life was decided when Jack and I stood at the altar, exchanging rings and vows. I had a wonderful career in the city, a loving husband, and a promising future. Our first few years of marriage were, well, I considered them to be good. Jack and I established a routine and both had work in the city. However, in retrospect, I can see the fissures that were already beginning to emerge. "Rita, do we have to go to your parents' farm this weekend?" Each time I proposed a visit, Jack would complain. "It smells like manure, and your dad always wants me to help with something." I would sigh and attempt to talk sense into his head. "They're my family, Jack, and they've done so much for us." "All right," he would complain, "but I'm not going to shovel any cow poop." I dismissed it as the squeamishness of a city lad. I had grown up with those duties and odors after all. However, I now question if I ought to have seen it as a warning sign. I became pregnant 2 years after we were married. My parents were thrilled, and I was elated. A grandchild. On the phone, Mom shrieked, "Oh, Rita, we're so happy for you." Jack didn't respond as enthusiastically. A child already. I suppose that's all right. I put it down to jitters. He would undoubtedly get used to the thought of fatherhood. Bless their hearts, my parents never stopped helping us. They funded our travels and purchased a car for us. Jack appeared to take it all for granted, but I was thankful. He'd say, "Of course they're helping us." That's what parents do. I fell in love again after the birth of our son Tommy. However, Jack didn't naturally become a parent, but he tried. I'll give him that. When Tommy wailed at night, he would grumble, "Can't you keep that kid quiet?" Some of us have to work in the morning. We were both getting used to being parents, so I would bite my tongue and remind myself of that. Life continued. Jack became more reluctant every time we went to the farm, but we still went when we could. "Your dad asked me to help fix the tractor again," he'd say. "I'm not a mechanic, for Christ's sake." I used to see my dad and Jack, both sweaty and well-stained, working together. Jack would wince and struggle with the tools while Dad patiently explained each step. Then disaster hit. Both of my parents died within a year. I was heartbroken. "They're gone, Jack." Into his shoulder, I cried. "I can't believe they're gone." He gave me a clumsy back pat. "It will be all right. They left us the farm at least." His remarks startled me, the property, the heritage of my family. And Jack's only thought was on what we had inherited. While I was grieving, Jack revealed something shocking. He stated we should sell the farm during a supper one evening. We could buy a big house in the city and live like kings. I was beaten down by loss and the rigors of parenting, but I wanted to defend and fight for my family's legacy. Furthermore, wasn't a wife expected to back her husband's choices? "Okay," I muttered. "If you think it's best." In an instant, my family's history was sold to the highest bidder after a few documents were signed. When the funds were sent to our joint account, Jack was ecstatic. He said, We're set for life, Rita. Stop working like a slave. We are free to do what we like. I nodded and smiled, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in my chest. This was what Jack wanted, and I was his wife. I had to support him, right? Life after selling the farm was different. The money from the sale cushioned us nicely. I'll give Jack that. We didn't have to work as hard anymore. We both cut back to part-time hours, and for a while, it felt like we were living the dream. But as the years went by, I started noticing things. Jack, who'd never been a hard worker to begin with, seemed to lose all motivation. He quit jobs at the drop of a hat, always with some excuse. That boss was a jerk, he'd say, or they expected too much. I'm not a slave, you know. I tried to reason with him. Jack, we can't live off the farm money forever. We need to think about our future. He'd wave me off. Relax, Rita. We're set for life. Why work ourselves to death? Meanwhile, our son Tommy was growing up fast. He graduated high school, then college, and before I knew it, he was working and living on his own. I was proud of him, but I missed having him around. Then one day, I was flipping through the newspaper when a name caught my eye. It was an article about a successful concrete production plant owned by none other than Jack's Uncle Robert. Jack, I called out. Did you see this article about your Uncle Robert? Jack's face darkened. I don't want to hear about that old tyrant, he snapped. I knew the story, or at least Jack's version of it. How his parents had died when he was young, leaving him in the care of his uncle. How Robert had been overbearing and controlling, trying to force Jack into the family business. He never listened to what I wanted, Jack had told me years ago. It was always about what he thought was best, so I left, started my own life. Looking at Jack now, lounging in his robe at 2 in the afternoon, I couldn't help but wonder if there was more to the story. Maybe it's time to make peace, I suggested gently. It's been years, Jack. People change. Jack's reaction was explosive. Make peace with that control freak? No way in hell, Rita. Drop it. I let it go, but the incident left me unsettled. There was so much anger there, so much resentment. It made me wonder what else Jack was carrying around, what other parts of himself he was hiding. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when I overheard Jack on the phone. His voice was curt, dismissive. I am not interested in his life, and it does not concern me, he said sharply before hanging up. My curiosity got the better of me. Who was that, honey? Jack's face was a mask of indifference. Hospital. My uncle's sick. If he kicks the bucket, at least I'll finally get something out of him. I stared at him, shocked. Jack, that's a terrible thing to say. He raised you. Yeah, and made my life hell, he snapped. I'm not going to see him. End of story. As I watched Jack settle back into his armchair, remote in hand, something inside me snapped. This wasn't the man I married. This wasn't the person I thought I knew. Without a word to Jack, I went to our bedroom and called Tommy. Hey, sweetie, I said when he picked up. How would you feel about meeting your great-uncle? Tommy was surprised, but agreed readily. An hour later, we were walking into the hospital, my heart pounding. The ICU was a haze of beeping machines and hushed voices, and there in a bed surrounded by monitors lay Jack's Uncle Robert. He looked small and frail, nothing like the tyrannical figure Jack had described. When we entered and introduced ourselves, his eyes filled with tears. Rita, Tommy, he said, his voice weak but warm. Oh, I've wanted to meet you for so long. Over the next hour, Robert told us his side of the story. How he'd taken Jack, and after his parents died, raised him as his own. I love that boy, Robert said, his voice cracking. I wanted him to have everything, to carry on the family business, to have a good life. But Jack, it seemed, had other ideas. He said he didn't want the responsibility, Robert continued. He said he didn't want to work hard like I did, staying up nights worrying about the business. I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach as Robert's words painted a picture I recognized all too well. Jack demanded I sell the business, Robert said, shaking his head. He wanted me to set him up with a monthly allowance, an apartment, a car. He said I owed him a carefree life. I glanced at Tommy, seeing my own shock mirrored in his face. That's not how life works, I told him. That money needs to be earned. I begged him to stay, to learn the business, Robert went on, but he just got angry. He said he'd find a rich wife and never have to work a day in his life. As I sat there in Uncle Robert's hospital room, memories from the past decade started flooding back, like pieces of a puzzle finally falling into place. I saw our life together in a new harsh light. Jack had never held a job for long. He always chose part-time work, called in sick often, took countless days off. I'd attributed it to stress, to him being a free spirit. But now I saw the truth. Life is for pleasure, Rita, he'd always say. Why kill ourselves working? I felt sick to my stomach as realization dawned. Jack hadn't married me for love. He'd married me for my family's money, for the comfortable life he thought I could provide. I was just a means to an end, the rich bride he promised his uncle he'd find. Tears welled up in my eyes as the weight of this truth settled on me. Our whole life together, our marriage, our family, it was all built on a lie. Uncle Robert's voice pulled me from my thoughts. I'm so sorry, he said, his voice weak. I won't be able to leave any to you or Tommy. I wanted to, but it's okay, I said, squeezing his hand. We don't need anything. I had plans, Robert continued, growing agitated. A new project, it would have changed everything, but I ran out of time. Suddenly, Robert's face contorted in pain. The machines around him started beeping urgently. You need to leave, a nurse said, rushing in. Now, a few days later, the call came. Uncle Robert had passed away. When I told Jack, his reaction made my blood run cold. Finally, he exclaimed, a grin spreading across his face. Took the old bastard long enough. I stared at him disgusted. Jack, he was your uncle. He raised you. He waved dismissively. Yeah. So when's the funeral? Do we need to go to that? In the end, Jack didn't attend. Tommy and I organized the funeral ourselves, a small dignified affair that I hoped would have made Uncle Robert proud. While I was grieving for a man I'd barely known, my husband was at home gleefully calculating his newfound wealth. The factor's got to be worth at least $10 million. I heard him saying on the phone. When I got home, can you believe it? I'm rich. I watched him strut around our house, boasting about his inheritance, and felt nothing but revulsion. This wasn't the man I thought I'd married. This was a stranger wearing my husband's face. And then things got worse. You know, Rita, Jack said one evening, his eyes cold, you're getting kind of old for me. I think I'm ready for an upgrade. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Excuse me. He shrugged, not even bothering to look ashamed. You heard me. I'm rich now, I can do better. Over the next few weeks, Jack's behavior became increasingly erratic. He'd stay out late, coming home in the early hours, reeking of booze and perfume. More than once, I spotted lipstick stains on his collar. Each time I confronted him, he'd brush me off. Mind your own business, he'd sneer. You should be grateful I come home at all. As I lay awake one night, listening to Jack stumble in at 3:00 a.m., I realized something had to change. I couldn't keep living like this. I deserved better. But more importantly, I needed to know the truth about everything. About Jack, about the inheritance, about the life I thought we'd built together. One morning, after another night of Jack stumbling in at dawn, I'd had enough. "Where were you?" I demanded, my voice shaking with anger and hurt. Jack smeared his bloodshot eyes, narrowing. "None of your damn business, Rita. You should be grateful I come back at all." I recoiled as if I'd been slapped. "Grateful? Is that what you think our marriage is?" He'd ignored my question, instead fixing me with a calculating look. "Say, how much is left from your parents' inheritance? We must have some savings, right?" The sudden change of topic threw me off guard. "What, Jack, we spent it all. The accounts are empty." His face twisted into an ugly mask of disgust. "Empty? You've got to be kidding me." He paced the room, muttering to himself. Then he turned back to me, his eyes cold. "Well, I guess that's it then. I'm done here. Done with you." Before I could respond, the front door opened. Tommy walked in, his eyes widening as he took in the scene. Jack's demeanor changed instantly. He plastered on a fake smile and approached our son. "Tommy, my boy. Just the person I wanted to see. I need you to sign something for me." He produced a document from his pocket, thrusting it at Tommy. "It's just a formality. You're renouncing any claim to Uncle Robert's estate. Since there's no will, it all comes to me anyway." Tommy glanced at me, confusion clear on his face. But after my nod, he took the paper and signed it without hesitation. Jack's grin was triumphant as he snatched back the document. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, he turned back to me, all pretense gone. "I want a divorce," he announced, his voice cold and flat. "I never loved you, Rita. I just tolerated you for your parents' money. But now I'm rich. I don't need you anymore." The words hit me like physical blows. Even though I'd suspected, hearing it laid out so brutally was devastating. "I'm moving to Uncle Robert's house," Jack continued, already pulling out a suitcase. "Don't try to contact me. It's over." And just like that, he was gone. 30 years of marriage packed away in a suitcase, and he walked out the door. I stood there, frozen, trying to process what had just happened. It felt surreal, like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. "Mom?" Tommy's voice was soft, concerned. "Mom, are you okay?" I turned to my son, my rock, and felt the dam break. Tears streamed down my face as Tommy wrapped his arms around me. "It's okay, Mom," he murmured, holding me tight. "We'll get through this. You're strong. You'll be okay." As I clung to my son, sobbing into his shoulder, a small part of me marveled at the man he'd become, kind, compassionate, everything his father was not. And I realized something. "You're the best thing he ever did," I whispered to Tommy. "The only good thing to come out of this marriage." Tommy squeezed me tighter, and in that moment, I knew that no matter what happened next, I wasn't alone. I had my son, and together, we'd face whatever came our way. The weeks following Jack's departure were a blur of pain and disbelief. I tried to keep my head high, to focus on moving forward, but it wasn't easy, especially when Jack seemed determined to flaunt his new life in my face. It started with the Facebook posts. Pictures of Uncle Robert's mansion, now Jack's new home, flooded his timeline. I tried to ignore it, to focus on healing, but then the photos changed. A young woman started appearing in them, blonde, beautiful, barely older than our son. In one photo, Jack had his arm around her, both of them grinning at the camera. The caption made my stomach churn. "Meet my fiancé, Candy. Upgrade complete." The call started almost immediately. Friends, acquaintances, even Tommy's old school teachers, all of them asking questions I didn't want to answer. "Rita, dear, is everything okay? We saw Jack's posts. What's going on? Are you and Jack really? I couldn't take it anymore. The humiliation, the constant reminders of Jack's betrayal, it was too much. So I did something. I never thought I'd do it. I called Jack and asked to meet. After consulting with a lawyer, the day of the meeting arrived. I waited at our old favorite cafe, divorce papers in hand. Jack swaggered in, candy on his arm. She couldn't have been more than 25, her face caked with makeup, giggling at something Jack whispered in her ear. Well, Jack, I smirked, pulling out a chair for Candy. If it isn't the old ball and chain. Candy, honey, meet Rita, the starter wife. Candy gave me a pitying look that made my blood boil, but I kept my cool. I have the divorce papers here, I said, sliding them across the table. I'm not asking for much, just the house. You can keep everything else. To my surprise, he picked up the pen without argument. Fine, have your little house. I've got bigger and better things now. He scrawled his signature across the documents. He turned to Candy, his voice sickeningly sweet. Now I can finally be with someone I truly love, someone worthy of me. I gathered the papers, my hands shaking slightly as I walked out of the cafe. I heard Jack's mocking laughter behind me, but I didn't look back. I had what I came for. The next day, I filed for divorce. As I handed over the papers to the court clerk, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. Life has a funny way of serving up justice when you least expect it. For me, it came in the form of a headline splashed across the local newspaper. Local business tycoon's empire crumbles. Nephew left with massive debt. It turned out that Uncle Robert had taken out an enormous loan just before his death, hoping to expand the business. He'd mentioned something about a new project during our hospital visit, but Tommy and I hadn't understood the implications at the time. Now it all made sense. I watched from afar as Jack's new life crumbled around him. He sold the factory, the mansion, the cars, everything, and still, he was left owing nearly $1 million. The cherry on top? His young bride, Candy, packed her bags and left the moment she realized Jack wasn't the wealthy catch she thought he was. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a twinge of satisfaction. Karma, it seemed, had finally caught up with Jack. Then one rainy evening, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Jack standing there, looking nothing like the smug wealthy man who'd walked out on me months ago. He was disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed and desperate. "Rita," he said, his voice cracking. "I've been such a fool. I see that now. Please, can we talk?" Against my better judgment, I let him in. For the next hour, I listened as Jack poured out his heart. He told me how he'd lost everything, how he'd realized what truly mattered in life. With beseeching eyes, he added, "Rita, I was wrong. So incorrect. However, I now realize that you are the only one who ever showed me genuine concern and affection." Then, to my complete surprise, Jack dropped on one knee and produced a little velvet box. "Please give me another opportunity, Rita. Remarry me. We can conquer anything if we work together." I was stunned for a second. Then, to my own amazement, I burst out laughing. What began as a little giggle turned into tears that were pouring down my cheeks. Jack's expression dimmed. "What's so amusing?" I stared him in the eye when I eventually regained my breath. "Oh, Jack, did you truly believe it would be so simple? That when things went bad, you could discard me like trash, cast me away, and then come crawling back?" His face grew serious. He growled and leaped to his feet, saying, "Listen here now. This is also my home. I am entitled to rights." I strolled quietly to the drawer and took out our divorce papers, displaying his own signature. "No, you don't, Jack. You gave up any rights to this house when you signed it. I now own it. Leave now, or I'll call the police." I briefly believed he may try to dispute more, but he must have seen from my look that I meant business. He turned and rushed out, slamming the door behind him without saying another word. I contacted Tommy as soon as he left and told him everything. As usual, my amazing kid was helpful. "Mom, you made the right decision," he added. "You have my admiration." He will never understand how much those comments meant to me. I made several important choices in the weeks that followed. I sold the house with all its memories, both good and terrible, since it seemed too huge for me alone. I used the proceeds to purchase a comfortable apartment in a bustling area that I had always adored. I feel like my life is just getting started at 60. Seeing all the locations Jack always said we would go, but never went, I've begun traveling. I've tried my hand at salsa dancing, joined a reading club, and started painting. I see Jack around town every now and again. Because of his faults and tribulations, he now appears older. Although my life didn't go as planned, you know what. I wouldn't have it any other way since I'm finally, fully, and contentedly myself for the first time in a long time.